Hello, I am Eddie O'Sullivan, and this is This Week in the Italian Campaign. In This Week in the Italian Campaign, brought to you by the Freedom for Italy Network, Episode 50, the start of Operation Olive and the attack on the Gothic Line. On the 16th of August 1944, Allied Supreme Commander in Italy, General Harold Alexander, issued the order for the attack on the Gothic Line, a formidable but in places incomplete defensive line that extended almost 200 miles across the Italian peninsula. It was also known as the Green Line. He said the intention was to drive the enemy out of the Upper Pennine positions and to exploit to the general line of the Lower Po, inflicting the maximum losses on the enemy in the process. The Eighth Army was to break through to the Po Valley and capture Ferrara, while Bologna was to be covered by the Fifth Army, simulating an offensive by both armies between Ponte and Pontedera, which was 12 miles east of Pisa. The Fifth Army was actually preparing to strike on the Florence to Bologna axis with the 2nd US and the 13th Corps. This was to happen as soon as the Germans had drawn sufficient forces away to counter the Eighth Army on the Adriatic. The D-Day for the Eighth Army was to be the 25th of August. The Fifth Army was to be ready to attack at 24 hours' notice from the 30th of August. The Allies were keen to break through the German defences to open up the route to the northeast through the Ljubljana Gap into Austria and Hungary. This would threaten Germany from the rear, but UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill was more concerned about the Soviet advance into Central Europe. The US Chiefs of Staff had strongly opposed this strategy as diluting the Allied focus in France, where the landings in southern France had begun on the 15th of August, but their attitude was to change later. The Eighth Army deployed no less than 4 corps for the attack: 1 Canadian, 2 Polish, and Britain's 5 and 10 corps. The Polish Corps was on the Adriatic coast, with the 5th Krasowa Division in the front line and the 3rd Carpathian Division in reserve. Next came Canada's 1 Corps, which had the British 21st Tank Brigade under command in the front line, and Canada's 5th Armoured Division in reserve. For the opening phase, the Corps' artillery was strengthened with the addition of Britain's 4th Infantry Division's artillery. First of the Canadians was Britain's 5th Corps, which deployed 5 divisions. Britain's 46th Infantry Division was on the right of the Corps front line, and the 4th Indian Infantry Division was on its left. In reserve were the British 56th Infantry and 1st Armoured Divisions, with Britain's 7th Armoured and 25th Tank Brigade. Further to the rear was Britain's 4th Division, waiting to be called forward to join the attack. The left flank of the 8th Army front was held by 10 Corps, with the 10th Indian Infantry Division and 2 armoured car regiments. These were the 12th and 27th Lancers. The Canadian Corps front was screened before the attack by Petrolian Polish cavalry units. The 5 Corps front was screened by patrols from the Italian Liberation Corps, which then numbered 21,000 men. Around a third of these were parachute-trained soldiers. The 2nd New Zealand Division was held in Army Reserve. In total, the 8th Army had 1,200 tanks, 1,000 guns, and 10 divisions. Facing the 8th Army from Pesaro to San Sisto was the German 10th Army's 76th Panzer Corps, commanded by General Traugott Herr. It initially only had 3 divisions. The 1st Parachute Division, under General Heydrich, faced the Poles. The 71st Infantry Division, under General Arapka, was inland on the Parachute Division's right, and the 278th Division, under General Hopper, was on the right flank in the hills, where it was in the process of relieving 5th Mountain Division, commanded by General Schrank. The 10th Army had further 5 divisions in the 51st Mountain Corps, which covered 80 miles of the front line on the right of 76 Panzer Corps. Another 2 divisions covered the Adriatic coast behind 76 Corps, the 162nd Turkoman Infantry Division and the 98th Infantry Division. The Army Group Reserve comprised 90th Panzer Grenadier Division and the 26th Panzer Division. The eastern end of the main Gothic Line ran along the northern slopes of the Foglia Valley to Pesaro. It was anchored on the cliffs between Pesaro and Cattolica to secure it from an amphibious landing. The Foglia Valley was narrow, ending some 12 miles inland, where the ground climbed steeply and the river became less of an obstacle. The hills provided excellent observation across the floor of the valley, which was thickly sown with defences. An anti-tank ditch crossed it, and there were minefields, pillboxes, and tank turrets. In the sector of the Gothic Line held by the 10th Army, there were more than 2,000 machine gun posts, almost 500 anti-tank gun, mortar, or assault gun positions, 3,600 dugouts and shelters, 16,000 riflemen's positions, and more than 70,000 Keller anti-tank mines and 23,000 S mines. There were 117 kilometers of wire obstacles, but only 4 Panther turrets had been completed, and 18 out of an intended 46 smaller tank gun turrets. At 1 minute before midnight on the night of the 25th of August, Allied guns opened up on targets along German positions north of the Matauro River. This was the signal for the assaulting brigades of the 1st Canadian and British 46th Divisions to cross the river, which was undefended and could be easily forded on foot. The Germans had been caught off guard. Both German Supreme Commander Field Marshal Kesselring and General Heydrich were on leave. The 4-mile front assigned to the 1st Canadian Corps centered on Monte Maggiore. Its leading battalions met no opposition at the Matauro. They pushed up the slopes to the north and entered the villages of Saltara and Serenjarina unopposed. At first light, tanks were ready to follow them across the river to join in the coming day's battle. Orders were issued for the advance to resume at 7:30 on the morning of the 26th of August towards the Foglia River. 5th Crossover, advancing on a 7-mile front from the sea, moved up in line with the Canadians, inflicting heavy casualties on German paratroopers caught in the open. On the left, the Gurkhas led the 4th Indian Division and reached a 1,500-foot ridge north of the Matauro. And by the morning of the 26th of August, 46th Division were up to 3 miles north of the river. And Kesselring was uncertain whether this was the start of a major offensive or just the 8th Army advancing to vacated ground ahead of the main Allied attack on the 5th Army front towards Bologna. He was still expressing the view on the 27th of August that the attack was a diversion and refused to commit reserves to the front. It was not until the 28th of August, when Kesselring saw a captured copy of Lee's order of the day issued prior to the attack, that Kesselring realized a major offensive was now underway. 3 divisions of reinforcements were ordered from Bologna to the Adriatic front, but they needed 2 days to get into position. Later on the 26th of August, Supreme Commander Harold Alexander drove into the bridgehead with UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Their spirits were high. The lack of resistance encouraged 8th Army Commander Oliver Leese to believe that the Germans had withdrawn to the Foglia. But the 8th Army's task was about to become much more demanding. In a sign that the end of the war was in sight, Paris was liberated on the 25th of August. Free French leader Charles de Gaulle marched along the Champs-Élysées amid wild celebrations in France's capital. But in Warsaw, where an uprising against the Nazis had started on the 1st of August, the news was grim. Outnumbered and facing the might of the German army, the Polish Home Army was finally forced out of Warsaw's Old Town at the end of the month. But the fighting would go on for more than a month more. On the 25th of August, UK Prime Minister Winston Churchill, while visiting the Eighth Army in Italy, sent a message to President Roosevelt proposing that Allied planes, including ones based in Italy, should land in Soviet-occupied Poland to support the uprising without Moscow's approval. Roosevelt rejected the idea out of fear of offending Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. On the 26th of August, while in Montemaggiore, Churchill met two Polish Corps Commander General Anders and told him that the Allies had agreed changes in Poland's borders after the war. In Egypt, 38th Irish Brigade was in Kasazim in the Suez Canal zone until it was moved to Sidi Bush near Alexandria on the 7th of August. On the 11th of August, members of 78th Division visiting Cairo attacked shops and restaurants in what became known as the Cairo riots. About 30 members of the brigade on leaving Cairo had been locked up by the military police, and more than twice that number from the division were also in the cooler. The brigade's commander, Pat Scott, said in his memoirs, "We soon discovered that those locked up were some of the more respectable members of society and that, apparently, no charge had been furnished against them. We invoked the Habeas Corpus Act and got them out." Each leave party had brought back a story of villainy of the local inhabitants of Cairo. Some had their pockets picked, some were deliberately robbed. Everyone was greatly overcharged. The attitude of many shopkeepers was insulting. Shoeshine boys threw blacking on soldiers' trousers. We all received a justifiable rebuke, but there is no doubt about it, all soldiers wearing the battle axe were treated with much more respect in Cairo after the exploit. In fact, later I received the congratulations of 3 admirals and an air marshal on the inconspicuous but apparently effective part which some soldiers wearing hackles had taken in this business. They considered such treatment was long overdue. Of course, they didn't understand the needs of military discipline, which must frown on an organized disorder. There were many arrests, but not of a single London Irishman. London Irish Rifles Colour Sergeant Ted O'Sullivan recorded in his post-war memoirs. Colonel Bradin had the battalion paraded upon their return from Cairo and officially congratulated them on staying clear of trouble. It may have been because of the Cairo riot that the division was broken into brigade units. I had an excellent 7 days in Alexandria, but stealing was rife. One morning, a section awoke with no canvas above them. During the night, the tent had been removed by thieves who had also stolen the tent poles and the rifles. Rifles had an easy market, particularly in Palestine. A South African officer named Lieutenant Brookman had all his kit, tent, and even blankets stolen as he slept. At the end of August, Ted O'Sullivan contracted otitis media after swimming in the polluted waters of Alexandria's Stanley Bay. Underweight and weakened by 21 months of frontline service and malaria he had contracted in Sicily in July 1943, Ted was to be knocked out of the war for 4 months.
Well, that brings us up to this period 80 years ago in Italy with the first day of the attack on the Gothic Line. This was a massive assault involving the Eighth Army in all its capacities. And it started a very difficult battle for the Eighth Army that was actually to go on for nearly a month. And we'll be coming back to the progress in this battle in the weeks ahead. So that's something to look forward to. I'm also pleased to update the progress of my father's formation, the Irish Brigade, which was in Egypt this time. And there are some sardonic accounts of what was a serious matter. It was a riot by the 78th Division in Cairo, and evidence that the temper of the Egyptian people was beginning to buckle under years of British rule. And the exigencies of being a major military base during the Second World War. And as you heard, weapons were being stolen in Egypt and being sold into Palestine, and tragically were to be used probably in the war that was to break out there between Arabs and Israelis and Jewish settlers in 1948. Anyway, that's a different story. All right, well, that's it for today. I'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in the Italian Campaign. So until then, from everybody here, it's goodbye, good luck, and may God bless you all.